So the first person we have coming up is Rachel from Entrepreneurs First. And Rachel, she's exactly what you want if you want to learn how to be an entrepreneur. She launched the world's leading global talent. Sorry, she launched Five Crowd, where she co-founded it, and that was bootstrapped, scaled, and exited in 3 years. She's been an entrepreneur in residence at DMZ. She's now launching in Canada Entrepreneurs First, and more importantly, she's a big game board nut, which I didn't know until today, and I'll have to play her sometime in person. As one way I'm getting by right now is taking those game boards and playing them digitally. So I don't know if you play Terraforming Mars, but if so, maybe we'll have to have a Terraforming Mars game.
I haven't played that, but Scrabble. I'm a huge Scrabble nut, and then like some of the German games, Settlers of Catan, that kind of stuff. So we'll definitely need to infuse that at some point.
Cool. So thank you for joining us. Just before we start, if someone's new here, we're going to be having a fireside conference, but if in the chat you can ask a question, we'll try to incorporate it into the conversation. So Rachel, I don't think I did a great job introducing you. So why don't you give us a bit more about your background and what you've done prior to EF?
Yeah, for sure. And I think you did cover it. So I started my career in traditional marketing, working at Johnson & Johnson, American Express, and then started my own company called Five Crowd, which, as you shared, bootstrapped, scaled, and in 2 years and 9 months, it was a period I blacked out during it, and we had an amazing team. And we had a really amazing journey. And so after that, I stayed on with the acquirer, worked on the integration to make sure it was successful. And then I spent the last 2 years with the DMZ, which I've loved. And, I've worked with over 50 founders, usually very early stage, to help them take off and have an impacting. Now my new gig is I'm launching something called Entrepreneur in Canada, as you shared. And really what we're looking for is Canada's best, brightest, hungriest people to start companies. So we go through the country, try and handpick folks that CEOs and CTOs. We pay them to quit their jobs. We pay them a monthly stipend. We a group of 50 twice a year. Help them meet each other. We help you come up and vet an idea, and then ultimately we're investors. So we invest in the company, but then also bring institutional investors with us.
So maybe take a step back. How'd you come across this role, and why'd you take this role?
Yeah. So if I go back to my Five Crowd journey, we got really lucky in a lot of ways. But I think one thing that we did right with Five Crowd was my co-founder dynamic. So my co-founder was Bramwell Shaw, and we drove, but at the same time, we were incredibly simpatico. We were a united front. Everything from values all the business vision and so on was really tightly held. And so when I think back to the importance of finding a brilliant co-founder that you just gel with and have fun with and can do unbelievable things together, and when I think back that was really a key part of our success. What I fell in love with EF was that I know so many really bright, great people that have always wanted to start a company. They've had that itch, but maybe they just didn't have the right person to start with, or maybe they didn't have a structured way to actually get it going. So that personal piece of being really appreciative to have had Bram, if you will, and had that great relationship, and seeing that go forward, trying to help build that in a cohort of 50, that was really what attracted me and got me really excited.
So maybe explain a bit more what you're looking for. Who's this program for? Because you mentioned a CEO and a CTO. How do I know I qualify to be one of those? Is it someone that's had 20 years at Microsoft as a developer?
It's a great question. So what I'd say is we look for folks that are extraordinary in their own way, and we define that level how we define it, but we look for individuals' trajectory relative to their peers. So in our cohort so far of 50 that starts at the end of September, we actually have 40 of the 50. So if I give you examples of profiles, on one end of the spectrum, we have someone who's exited a company for over 50 million, CEO of 100 plus tech company. So very credentialized. He's done it, super credible. That's, one example of someone in the cohort. And then on the other extreme, we have someone who's in their early 20s, kind of full-time job, but he's launched several hundreds of thousands to 1 million users on different platforms. Really look for is superpowers in individuals, so that when we bring them together, they can figure out where they can complement each other to really, excel and build a company. Final piece I'll say on it is we look for that we've seen to be predictable that have been very successful entrepreneurs. So the first, in some kind of way, do they have a plan? And then finally, they command followership.
And so you're looking for someone who has, let's say, a spike in a certain part of what they do, doesn't have a co-founder. Do you want them to come with an idea or not? Or would you prefer they just come with an open mind?
It's a great question. So I'd say definitely most people that are entrepreneurial probably have a few ideas that they're swirling. They might have observed a few or have been seeing trends in the market. So, we definitely look for folks that are coming in without a structured business. So if you've already incorporated a team, you're probably too late stage and you wouldn't get the same value out of our program. But if you've got a few ideas, problems, and you're, someone else a different maybe field or from a complementary field, and that's really the sweet spot that we look for.
Yeah, so some people are saying they've lost Rachel's picture. Hopefully they'll come back. It might be just the buffering of Hopin or the internet in general. But I think we can still hear Rachel, so we'll continue. Rachel, so you're looking for people that want to start a company right now. There's a high unemployment. There's lots of risk. Why should someone join now?
It's a great question. So, I'll kind of share two things. One is that, to your point, it wasn't hit as hard as some other regions. Look at the crisis that came out of 2008. There were phenomenal companies that came out of it, right? The Shopifys, the Ubers of the world. And so I do think where we've had crises, we've had great innovation come out of it. On the flip side, unrelated to timing, what's really exciting in deep tech is that we have more tech now that's ready to be commercialized than ever before. So especially when we look across Canadian academic institutions and research labs, we have such brilliant talent that have, patents or pieces that they've done throughout that just need to be brought to market to solve a really big problem. So, I'd say why now on the more optimistic, instead of just looking at the crisis, is that we have really rich talent, has the potential to drive a massive impact on the world. We just need to empower them.
So what do you see people do to prepare to enter a program like this, or just start a startup right now? So let's say, again, you're at, I don't know, who am I going to pick on? Ada. You're a developer or good biz dev person, and you're thinking of leaving. What should I do if I'm that person to prepare? Like, what again? Good time to start. Might be some risk. Yeah. What any advice you have to someone that's thinking of taking the plunge, either with EF or just a startup?
I'll put my Rachel hat on versus my EF hat on for that. I'd say there's probably three things when I reflect back to my decision to start Five Crowd that, I didn't do well and that I did do well, that I would, talking to someone at Ada, for example, would come in part. I think the first thing is really introspection to decide, do you really want to be an entrepreneur, right? The media glamorizes it. It looks sexy on the cover of magazines, but at the end of the day, what's on a magazine is like crying in your car, eating a pizza after getting fired by a client, as an example, right? And so I think it's really digging into that personal introspection and saying, what are my motivations? And, what am I really looking for? DMZ as an example with 50 plus companies. I think folks were maybe learning that or having that reflection too far into the journey. Yeah. One is just that personal pause to say, do I actually want to do this, right? Thinking about your life stage and life. And the second, that, if you will, if you're at a company and kind of thinking about, should I do it, is more on the strategy front. And it's looking for really interesting problems and so, throwing yourself into, asking good questions and trying to figure out, is there an unmet need that you have a right to win? Would be that second key thing. And I'll share my example with Five Crowd. And, I worked at Johnson & Johnson and felt the pain working in marketing there. And then because I was feeling it, living it, trying to find a solution, easier to then go and actually build the solution. So I'd say just immerse yourself in the problem. You can. The final thing is really tactical and silly, but and that's to incorporate ASAP. So it's so funny, but there's a clock from once you incorporate in Canada. And for a lot of really amazing programs like Shred, so getting research and development support from the government, grants getting the sooner you incorporate and start getting some of that traction, and just having financial statements, even if they're very slow in the uptick, there's just huge.
Interesting. So I'm going to pick on two threads I heard. One is you said look for a problem you're going to solve, and before when you were talking about EF, you said there's a lot of great technology out there. So
Yep.
if I'm a potential founder, I'm looking at a company. What's more important, is it the technology or the problem, and how do those interact with each other?
Oh, good question. I'll share a couple thoughts, your thoughts on that after. I mean, I'm in marketing with the problem, because I think if you really understand the pain that you're solving, the rest will take care of itself, right? And the tech should be able to align to that. And there's pieces that I love, and again, I did founders on. The first is something that many folks might have heard called the mom test, to the essence of a problem, instead of asking questions in a way that might give you a biased result. And then the second one is talking to humans. And so this is also just a really good, guide as to how to actually get to the problem, to make sure that you don't have an echo chamber of potentially, insights that you're solving, a problem that isn't there.
So those are two interesting reads. If you, after you're off, maybe in the backstage, you can just help the team find them. We'll put links up
Yeah,
to them after.
they're free.
So yeah, I figured it online. So Nick will help you find it, and Nick will post it up for all the people so they can read it after. So it's so interesting. You like explaining the solution very simply with the mom test basically says I call it the grandma test. Can I explain what I'm doing to my grandmother? So it's interesting because you're going problem first. How about do you, and again, I'll put the EF hat on here. Do you see people saying, how has technology enabled the disruption of the value chain and create new opportunities? And how do you think those perform versus someone trying to solve an old problem?
I mean, I think you can problem orient while you have the tech, if that makes sense. And what I mean
Yeah.
by that is, to your point, I'll pick on PhD grad that joins our program, research that's quite theoretical, practical in the industry. To do is hypothesize, 3 to 5 potential problems that you're actually going to solve with that tech. Maybe it's different. But I mean, it's funny, even being an entrepreneur, I'd say I'm a more risk averse person. And, I think it's a riskier path to choose a tech only play, not actually validating the problem. It's possible. There's many companies that have succeeded with it. But I think if you have the tech with your users, or whomever is going to be the audience on the receiving end, and then back, and I think the history has just shown that it proves to be very effective.
Yeah.
For me,
I guess my response to your, I do believe solving a problem is always the best way forward. But I do believe if you don't solve a problem, you won't create value for anyone. But I do believe technology does, or even the current environment will change value chains and open up opportunities to create new problems and solve new problems in a way, or to capture value that you couldn't before. So for example, right now, I think if you're looking at the travel industry or the retail industry, with all the technology out there and with basically the current economic environment, there might be problems that are not obvious that are enabled that you didn't realize were problems before this technology enabled you to solve them, and they're open to you're open to create value right now. But it's a bit harder to identify and a bit harder to start with. If you're starting with a problem, I think if you're starting a company without a problem, just the technology, it's difficult.
I think that makes sense, right? And maybe the way a bit different. It's less, hey, I'm asking you what you need, and it's more, I think, how we could drive Z piece of technology, and then therefore find a very different way to quickly. You're saying, but I pages.
So
something on either side, right?
So let's talk a bit about validation, because I think that's one part of the EF program. So how does EF try to validate a potential startup or idea or solution quickly? Because your program's roughly 10 weeks long, and so you're trying to help companies start. So do you have to have an accelerated way to validate? What's the approach you take?
I often get the question from a lot of the traditional incubators like the DMZ that have been affiliated and so on, and because we're and really what we specialize the first part of the program. So we'll join September 28th. Hopefully there's people listening that are interested and interested in applying. I'll we get to the most ideal team dynamics as soon as possible. And then in that 12 weeks, vendors talking over each other, are each other saying things that are just so important. And then obviously, so background, network, all the really important things that will come to building, and then looking on that team and based on their background and based on their vision, do they have a right to win in that space?
So I'll ask one last question. And again, if anyone wants to sign up for EF or apply, I think Nick's put a link in. But so I heard a lot about reference to team versus problem. So from your perspective or EF's perspective, is it the right team, the right market, or the right problem to solve that creates winning teams?
Oh man,
a small question to end it on.
All three. I think at the end of the day, the people piece, and there's great stories from our alumni. So we'll go through the program from over 3 many large exits, one that was after 18 months for 150 million US. So we've had really, really good success and track records through the program and with this model. And at the end of the day, what we've seen time and time, people like to win in that specific market, the rest takes care of itself.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Super excited to see EF launch in Canada. I believe we got a lot of things going in the ecosystem. We're going to have Sunil, who's from TechStars. And what I love seeing is another organization that's going to help create more entrepreneurship, create more world-beating companies in this country. First cohort, you apply now.